work on ARLI now. Tarsia Rhyne is a veteran teacher at South Shore Fine Arts Academy, Elementary Academy, sorry. And I don't know if she knows this, but a good friend of mine worked with her as a student teacher and talks about how much of an impact she had on him when he was a baby teacher. So such a pleasure to get to hear from her today. She is going to be sharing with us her learning around socio-emotional learning in her class and how to support socio-emotional needs like this one through introducing more meetings during the day. So I'm going to turn it over to Tarsia. Look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Hello, everyone. All right, so I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. All right. So good evening, everyone. My name is Tarsia Rhyne. The title of my presentation is Supporting Social Emotional Learning Through Class Meetings. And I teach at South Shore Fine Arts Academy. A little about me and South Shore. I am a Chicago native. I have been teaching for 22 years. South Shore Fine Arts Academy is located at 1415 East 70th Street. And I was a part of the team of teachers who helped open South Shore Fine Arts Academy in the fall of 2009. We started as a small school with pre-K to second grade, and we added a grade each year. Now we are a K-8 school. We had two classes per grade level, and I taught kindergarten at South Shore for 12 years. However, our enrollment has been decreasing over the years, and now we have one classroom per grade level. And now I teach first grade. So I teach first grade this year, and I also taught first grade last year. So as you can see, our enrollment has gone down over the years, and so when we started out with 398 students way back then, now we are at 273 students. So, and we have 74.4% of our students are low income students. And our attendance rate is 88%. So that's a little bit about the school. So now I'll give you background about my research. So first graders, I teach first grade, as I just mentioned, are 6 and 7 years old, and they are learning how to regulate their bodies. So my research was around social emotional learning was really important for these kids because last year was their first year of school due to the pandemic. So every day in my class, I had students crying and hitting and giving the silent treatment every single day. So I was like, I need to do something to help with their social emotional growth. So I already offered one class meeting every day. So at the class meeting, my students had a chance to talk about how they were feeling and just see what they get support from each other. But I wanted to incorporate an additional class meeting, which would happen later in the day. I wanted to strengthen the classroom community by having students listen to each other and solve problems together. So that's why I started this research. I wanted to implement an additional class meeting so students could learn to determine how they are feeling. And I wanted them to recognize the changes in their body when they are having strong feelings and be able to think about what to do. So I like discussing my feelings with other people, and it helps me feel better. Also, there is a possibility that when you're sharing, whoever's listening might give you some advice. So I also wanted students to learn behavior management strategies so that they would not resort to hitting, crying, and silent treatment. Finally, I wanted to build our classroom community by having students share their experiences with each other because I thought it would teach them to have concern for others. My research question. Here's my research question. What happens when I incorporate an additional class meeting into my first grade class? That's my research question. Here are my sub questions. Number 1, what strategies can I use to help first graders manage their feelings? What does it look like when students' social emotional growth improves? And what happens when incidents that occurred during the day are used as topics for discussion during the class meeting? How did I collect data? I sent out parent surveys. I sent questionnaires to parents at the beginning of the year, then around holiday break, which was December, and then again in March. And I asked questions such as, are you concerned about your child's social emotional growth? And how does your child calm down? I also sent a survey to the specials teachers, gym, arts, music, and playing the book. I asked questions such as, I asked, please select the names of students who you had to speak to about hitting in your class. Please select the names of students who used a calming strategy in your class. I took notes in my journal each week, recording incidents related to social emotional learning, anything related to hitting, crying, and silent treatment. I also recorded what happened in our class meetings. My journal was my main source of data collection. It was difficult collecting data from parents and specials teachers. The art teacher and the PE teacher were the only teachers who were willing to complete surveys regularly. The case study students. Now I will introduce the case study students. I decided that it would have been too hard to track data on my whole class, so I selected 5 students who seemed to need a lot of social emotional support. Some of the challenges faced by the case study students range from adjusting to new siblings at home, to not getting to school on time or not getting to school at all, to violence in the home and absentee parents. The perfectionist. He is the youngest of 2 siblings. He loves math, plays with blocks, and enjoys dancing to the song Old Town Road. I chose the perfectionist because he cries whenever he meets a challenge. So the concerns were there was a lot of hitting, crying, and silent treatment. The CEO. She is the middle child, loves listening to and discussing stories, and selects dramatic play, good at drawing and coloring. And I selected her as a case study student because she likes to challenge authority. She cries when she does not get her way, and she hits other children when they do not comply with her rules. So the concern was crying, throwing fits, hitting, and the silent treatment. Mr. Sonic. He has an older brother, prefers activities like running, climbing, and throwing, likes to create new games to play and explore new materials, and he loves math. I selected him as a case study student because he is known for roughhousing. He is having fun, but other children do not want to play like that. So he gets in trouble frequently for offending others. And the challenge was a lot of hitting and just self-regulation in general. The investigative reporter. She's number 3 of 4 sisters, loves reading picture books about historical figures, selects dramatic play, enjoys dancing and making TikToks. I chose her as a case study student because she cries and gives the adults the silent treatment a lot. She hits others and claims that she didn't do it. The challenge, a lot of crying, silent treatment, and hitting. Mr. Big Heart. Lives at home with mom and a 9-month-old sister, likes listening to stories, selects blocks, clay, or Legos. I chose him because he is very emotional and he cries several times each day. The challenge was crying, fits, and hitting. So the second class meeting, you see my students seated here on the rug, and then the picture down here is a close-up of what our board looks like, and that's where they check in right before the meeting, and they put their name under a certain feeling. So an example of how the second meeting goes, students start with, I am feeling, because since the second meeting was scheduled after lunch, the main topic of the meeting was always what happened at recess and what happened at lunch. I decided to focus on the second class meeting because there were a lot of incidents of students hitting and hurting each other during recess, and students returned to class angry with each other. So we're going to watch a video of the meeting.
I'm feeling happy because we was outside. Me, Ava, Rashawn, Leakin, and Michaela, we had played tag, and there was no hitting. Except for Krista and Malachi, they was okay today. So we had played tag. Me and Leak would keep on tagging each other, and that made the game more fun. That was fun.
That was fun.
All the fun side, all the fun. I'm happy because I didn't get a shovel today, and we was playing nice, and we was playing tag, me and Malachi, and and we was playing different groups. We was playing different. I was enjoying it. I played Dr. Crying on the slide. No, I wasn't. I was not crying. I was angry. No, because people were not playing the game. That's all. People were not playing the game fairly, so he might get mad. I don't give my point on you. So Maya was playing not quite. She was a tiger. Again. Oh, come on. And I had a good time. And I feel angry. I feel angry because I love Teresa. Abel and Michelle keep us cheer.
Okay. So by the time this video was taken, my students understood how to take turns talking. But at first I had to intervene in the meetings a lot more to help them understand, okay, it's this person's turn and you have to wait till your turn. My students also started off raising their hands, waiting on the time to talk. But as you can see in the video, they learned how to get into the conversation without my help. They learn to listen to each other and determine, a good time to enter the conversation. Students have become more comfortable naming their feelings and explaining what events led to specific feelings. They also learn how to question each other, offer advice, and how to console each other. My case study students always wanted to share during the meetings. My findings. A lot of what you will hear today is an analysis of my teacher journal, my main source of data. The perfectionist. The perfectionist shows improvement in the areas of hitting and silent treatment. The category labeled other that you see here on the chart was used for incidents such as offenses to other children, having fits, and other class disruptions. The strategies that helped him: time alone and taking deep breaths. Here's what his mom had to say. He never really cried a lot at home. He gives the silent treatment to family too. The CEO. You can see her chart here. She had more incidents after the holiday break than she had before. Strategies that helped her: time alone and talking it out. Her mom says she is not crying and throwing fits anymore. Here's the chart for Mr. Sonic. He shows improvement in hitting and the silent treatment. His dad says, I was never concerned about his social emotional growth. Strategies that helped him: talking it out and writing about it. Strategies that helped the investigative reporter: time alone, hugs, talking it out. Her mom says, I am very concerned about her SEL growth. She seems to be getting more and more moody. Mr. Big Heart. Strategies that helped him: time alone, hugs, and deep breaths. His mom says, I see some improvement because he does not get in trouble for hitting others anymore. It was hard for him to understand boundaries. But if you look at his chart, I didn't record any hitting incidents after the holiday break. Silent treatment went from 1 incident to 0, and he had fewer incidents in the other category. Overall, the total incidents decreased. While analyzing the notes from my journal, I found 27 instances where the class worked together to resolve issues. Here are a few examples. Some of the things that the kids said in the group. So when we had a problem with students hitting and wrestling at recess, they decided that instead of so much touching, they can do activities like racing, tag, and playing on the monkey bars. Another time, when they argued at recess about how to play the game Sorry, they decided that they could look up the instructions for the game or ask someone else instead of arguing over how the game was supposed to be played. And my last example is a time when a student did not understand the purpose of our class meetings and continuously told the class that he was upset. Then he proceeded to list everything that happened to him prior to the meeting, including accidents. And I did a reenactment of someone accidentally running into someone else, and we discussed the proper way to handle it during the meeting. And in the end, this student said, another student told him, our class meeting is not the time to just tattle on everyone, and we do not need to report accidents. So now I'm going to revisit my question. What happens when I incorporate an additional social emotional class meeting into my first grade class? What strategies can I use to help first graders manage their feelings? Encourage students to verbalize their feelings using a sentence stem, such as I am feeling blank because blank. Encourage students to use a calming strategy, such as taking a deep breath or visiting the calm down area. What does it look like when students' social emotional growth improves? The number of crying, hitting, and silent treatment incidents decrease. What happens when incidents that occur during the day are used as topics for discussion during the class meeting? Students work together to discuss any issues brought up and to solve problems. Here are my recommendations. On the school level, all classes should have class meetings. Make time for sharing about feelings and designate a calm down area. On a district level, Prioritize community building activities such as class meetings, professional development on the benefits of class meetings, and professional development on social emotional learning. On a national level, teacher education programs that include projects that incorporate SEL in the classrooms. Thank you for your attention.
I'm going to give Tarsia a moment to look at all the people applauding her before I move into questions. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and for sharing with us what is so clearly a journey and a lot about kind of how you were interpreting and seeing what was happening in the space too. I think that it's always really wonderful to see how an action research project is like the teacher analyzing themselves and analyzing the teacher journal. So thank you so much for that. I had at least one person who had their hand up. Please definitely keep your hand up if you have a question to ask. I have a couple questions that were shared with me directly that I would like to ask out there. And while I'm doing that, please note that Sarah has shared a feedback form for Tarsia so that you can give her all your glows and also share any other questions and thoughts that you have for her. So a first question that we had was around the group size. You know, you chose a specific number of case study students. We got a chance to have a glimpse into your classroom. How many students were in your classroom? And do you see ways in which like the number of students that you had in the circle might have been impacting some of what you were seeing as well?
I had 16 students in class. And I don't know what you mean, the number of students I see in the circle?
Yeah, so I guess just a follow-up question there that relates that I don't think I asked well was, you know, this is a very structured space, having the circle space. And then I know that there are also probably the ways that you're interacting with students individually. Was this for like more students than you often have in class, fewer students, similar number of students, and having them in that circle structured space where they're going around and sharing? Was there anything that you were observing because of that group size?
Oh, I think it's fewer students than I usually have, but not by much. So I usually have like 20, 18 or so, but it was 16, so it's around the same amount. They don't go around in order, they just pop in wherever they can. And so we started the circle structure of the meeting because if you're sitting in rows, you have to turn around to see the person behind you. It was just easier to see everyone if we're in a circle. But yeah, they don't go in order. They just pop in to the meeting and say something when they have a chance.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. For me as a middle school teacher, it's always helpful to hear about how those structures live in younger grade levels. We had a question about language. In what ways do you think that language development and students' kind of ability to express verbally may have been impacting the behaviors that you were seeing? And then did you see any ways that the circle work may have been impacting that language development and ability to self-regulate?
Yes, I definitely did. I think in the beginning of the year, they couldn't really express how they were feeling or what was going on. And so I think that's why some of the reactions were like hitting and crying and having fits and doing a lot they couldn't really explain. And so I think that giving them the vocabulary and learning a lot about feelings and how your body changes helped them to explain a lot of what they were feeling. So I think that everybody's vocabulary was expanded because now they know a lot more ways to feel, because at first they were just happy and sad, and there was no because. So yeah, I just think that having them discuss it twice a day, every day, was beneficial for everyone. Vocabulary definitely was expanded.
Thank you. Multiple people noticed that the behavior that seemed to decrease the least was crying. And so we're interested in your thoughts about why do you think this might have been happening? And did you see things change in how students were crying? Was some of it happening more during the meetings than other times during the day? Tell us a little bit more about that particular finding.
Right. I think that the data shows that crying decreased the most, but I think that's based on what I wrote in my journal. But it decreased a lot in real life. Like, I didn't record everything, I don't think, but I know for a fact that my main criers were crying every single day, and they're not doing it anymore. But I just think if this research is based on the data I collected in my journal, and if you're not crying, I'm not writing about it. I'm not thinking about it every day. Like, oh, he's not crying anymore. And he's still not crying. And you know what? Still not crying. So I just think it just happened like that. But I do think that it decreased a lot. And I guess if I had to answer why it doesn't show that in the data, I just think because it wasn't happening. Like, you're writing about the things that drove your day. And so if it was like a fight and somebody was crying, they was having a fit, and oh my God, I had a headache and I went home tired, you're more likely to write about that than to write about, oh, as a matter of fact, he didn't cry today.
That does make a lot of sense. We notice the things when they happen. We don't talk about them when they don't. We have time for one more question, and I'd like to turn it to someone to share live. I have Loretta Walton. Please unmute and share your question or comment.
My question was in reference to, you were saying about you had them jumping in, but it seemed like, if I understood correctly, as time went on, you started allowing them or having them to raise their hand to participate so that it would be more organized. Am I understanding correctly?
No, actually, it was the opposite. In the beginning, they raised their hand and I called on them. And now we're going to hear from, Ava, and now we're going to hear from Sydney, and now we're going to hear from Frederick. But then as time went on, I was like, okay, I'm not calling on everyone, let's begin. And so I made it so that even if I'm not sitting there in the circle, the meeting can start.
So it didn't cause a problem in them being able to wait for each other to respond, is what I was concerned about.
It did not cause a problem. As you can see from the video, somebody started talking while the first person was talking already, and he started talking. So that person just got quiet. Like, since you're going to interrupt me, I'll just let you finish. And then when you're done, I'll say something else. So no, it didn't turn into a problem.
That's good.
Thank you so much for that question. Let's give Tarsia one more round of applause. You can always unmute too, so that we can hear like thunderous applause from everywhere. But I'm seeing some good visual.
Yay!
All right, now sit back and enjoy a glass of something nice, whatever that is. And I am going to introduce our next speaker. So our next presenter, Leah Stephens, is a teacher at Sor Juana Elementary. She is a 15-year elementary music teacher, which blows my mind in a wonderful way, because music education is so underrepresented in Chicago. So that's awesome. And I'm really excited to hear her presentation, because like we were hearing about self-regulation and opportunities for feedback in Tarsia's work with our littles, this will be an opportunity to hear about what it can look like in a content-specific area. Leah is going to be sharing with us how she has incorporated feedback into her work with students, and in what ways that can impact, I think, students' self-perception and maybe reduce anxiety as they are performing. So I'm going to turn it over to Leah.
Thanks, Kate. Let me just share screen really quick here. All right. Nope, I'm going to do one more thing to make sure I can see what I'm doing here. Okay. So I'm so happy to see so many faces from people that I know. Thank you all. Shout out to my sister for being here from Canada. So for those of you who don't know me, I am originally from Florida. I started piano at the age of 9, and I continued singing and private voice lessons in a classical tradition, continuing my education in high school at Douglas Anderson School of the Arts in classical voice and piano, going on to Florida Southern and continuing to do classical piano, accompanying classical singers and choruses. And then I got my first teaching job out of undergrad, teaching chorus and piano to middle school students. And then I continued in the classical tradition at Northwestern. And then when I was looking for jobs, this is what I ended up teaching. So not really what I was expecting. But fast forward 9 years later, and I'm still teaching elementary general music because I love it. 5 years ago, I started teaching at my current school, Sor Juana Elementary. We opened similarly to Tarsia with about 92 students in grades K-2. The picture on the left is nearly our entire teaching staff that first year with our aldermen. And we started in the building on the left, and then this year we moved into the building on the right, and we currently have 400 students in grades K-6, and then in 2 years we'll be a full K-8 school. So with that trajectory, this was the first year that I taught middle school students since 2018, and I could see my little babies changing, losing their confidence in the musical skills I taught them, and some of them not being as interested in school. So I decided to focus my research on 6th grade. We do have 2 programs at Sor Juana. We have a STEAM program and a classical program, and we refer to each class with a color. So our STEAM students are lavender, our classical students are violet. We are a magnet school. The STEAM students enter our school through a lottery, and the classical students are selective enrollment. They have a certain test score to be accepted into the program, and their math, humanities, and science curriculum are accelerated a grade level above their actual grade. So back in October, I gave a beginning of the year anonymous survey, which had some of the results you see here on this slide. And as I was reading the research on self-efficacy, I noticed a drop in the middle school years. There's a notable drop in the research. So I wanted to make class more engaging for my students and give them more of a challenge, but also to try and preempt this drop in self-efficacy that happens. So this led to my research questions about how feedback could impact the musical performance self-efficacy of my 6th grade students. I used several different data collection tools. The musical performance self-efficacy scale, which I'll call the MPSES, I gave as baseline data in December and then again in May. Students had many written reflections and written feedbacks and oral feedback throughout the year. They watched videos of themselves doing video analysis of what their feedback was and also their musical performance, and then my evaluations and a small focus group. So before we get too far, I need to define self-efficacy for you. So it's one's belief in one's ability to succeed in specific situations or accomplish a task. It is task specific. So for instance, even though as a pianist, I'm very comfortable accompanying for a choral group, I would have a lower self-efficacy if you asked me to take a jazz solo in a jazz quartet. Our focus this year in 6th grade was mainly instrumental and specifically drums and some barred instruments. So in December, I began with baseline data, the MPSES, and I had students take the baseline data. It has 24 questions, and they rated themselves 1 to 100 on each item. This is designed to give an overall score of their self-efficacy, but then also the 4 different sub-areas that contribute to an overall self-efficacy score. So you can see there some of the items that are on the MPSES. On looking and examining the beginning of the year results, I saw that 50% of the lavender students scored themselves below a 50 overall, and 30% of violet students scored themselves below a 50 overall. Only 20% of students across both classes scored their self-efficacy above a 75. I wanted to start increasing their self-efficacy right away, and so I decided to focus on inactive mastery experience, which is all about successfully doing the specific task. It's the biggest contributing factor to overall self-efficacy. So I had both students perform in the winter concert. So the first type of feedback I'm going to discuss is self-evaluation. The 6th grade lavender group played a Puerto Rican carol called Three Kings at the winter concert, and the violet group arranged and performed a drama ensemble from the world music drumming curriculum. In January, about a little like 2 weeks after the concert, they filled out a reflection regarding their feelings about the winter concert. Overall, it seemed to be very affirming for them, with nearly 70% of students saying that performing in the winter concert was a positive experience. Many cited nervousness, but relief and pride when it was over. There was a huge trend and positive feedback from family, especially in the lavender group. I could already tell that for many students, successfully performing in the concert in front of a big but friendly audience was going to support an increase in their self-efficacy. And these are some of the things that they had to say. For some of them, it was their first time performing in front of a crowd. And for all of them, it was their first time performing on our brand new stage, new to us. Because students had already performed for the winter concert, I didn't have them perform for spring, but I know that it was important for them to have a culminating experience for the year. So in May, I invited 2 groups of younger students to an individual sharing session during class. The lavender group performed for 4th graders and the violet group performed for 2nd graders. So you'll see here the type of solo that each 6th grade violet student took during their sharing session. This is question and answer drumming with me asking the question and the student giving the answer. Students had an overwhelmingly positive attitude about the sharing session, as witnessed by these responses, and then on the right, the words that they used to describe how things went. In the spring, I also decided to ask them about our preparation between the concert in the winter and then our sharing session. I wanted them to continue to think about the process and the rehearsal strategies used that got us from introducing the music for the first time to a performance-ready piece. By this point in the year, they were more frequently citing rehearsal strategies. And as of May, the practice plan is clearer when I lead, as I did in the spring sharing, but students were beginning to make progress on how to lead themselves through small group rehearsals. Students also gave a great deal of peer feedback this year. After reading the winter concert reflections, many students in the violet class especially mentioned that they wanted more feedback from the audience or more useful feedback. So I decided to have a small focus group of students that could help direct the type of feedback that I asked them to give each other. There were 10 students across both classes. During the focus group, they discussed stage fright a lot, and they also discussed their preferred method for giving feedback. They said that they trusted teachers often more than other students because of their expertise, but they also talked about how they appreciated getting constructive feedback, which to them meant positive feedback with some things to work on so that they improve. I used this information from the focus group to design the first round of partner feedback. And in late January, students started to practice question and answer drumming. This provided them with some solo opportunities in front of both the partner and the class. We worked on question and answer drumming to improve technique and rhythm and pattern creation and listening skills. Students rated themselves and rated their partner, writing down what they would say to their partner and then delivering that feedback to them. This example is from a student that took the criteria and internalized it and then put it into her own words. On the positive side, 69% of students did use the criteria when they delivered feedback to their partner, but it was mostly superficial and a lot of listing things and simply quoting the criteria. I also wanted to find out what was going through their heads while they were creating musical questions and answers. This would help me support them with musical strategies to improve their drumming and increase their metacognition, their thinking about their thinking. Lavender gave a great variety of answers and were clearly thinking more actively and deeply about their drumming strategies. Nearly a third of the violet group said that they did not have a strategy and were just doing whatever came into their heads. In April, we returned to question and answer drumming with a new partner and a new round of feedback. This time, students gave musical feedback, but also rated the specificity and strategic nature of the feedback. So feedback on feedback. And so they This time around, 100% of them gave feedback using the musical criteria, even though they had less structured support and no sentence stems. 34% of the students in Violet gave a strategy to help support their partner, or they pointed out the specific area or place in the music or technique that they needed to fix. And half of the students in the Lavender group supported their partners in this way. And these are examples of the ways that they talked about how their partners helped them during this time. The last type of feedback I implemented with students was teacher feedback. Early on, I noticed that without a piece of paper in front of them telling them what to say, when I heard them working in partners or groups, their framing was not always kind or helpful. So I gave them "I noticed" and "I wonder," or "I wonder if you could try," to help support them giving feedback to their partners. What I did was video recorded them drumming question and answer with a partner, then 2 other partners giving them feedback with "I noticed" and "I wonder." It was a valuable exercise for them to give feedback to each other, but it took a huge amount of time for them to do it and record it, and then also for me to give feedback to every kid. And so I just gave up about halfway through, because by the time I was halfway through, it was not even timely feedback anymore. Another part of one of my goals for this year was continuing to put students into partnerships with people who they wouldn't normally pair with. I wanted them to hear feedback from different people and also have some of the stronger students support those who might be struggling. So in March, we moved into trio work. The trio work focused on part independence, music reading, and use of a rehearsal plan and musical strategies. So if you're not a music reader, you can see the 3 lines of music, 1, 2, or 3. Those are all happening at the same time, and the students have to perform what their line is against what the other 2 people are playing. After they performed for the class, they watched a video of their performance and then evaluated individual accuracy for each line of music, technique, and posture. After they watched the video and evaluated themselves, then they received my evaluation and compared the 2 ratings. You can see from these 2 graphs that when I compared their self-evaluation to my grade, 30 to 40% of them were either completely accurate or they were accurate in their overall grade, but then had a difference in sub-area. That's the bottom part there that's circled. After students rated themselves and saw my evaluation, I asked them to reflect on whether they were surprised with their grade. And I also asked them to rate how they were feeling about their musical performance that day on a scale from 0 to 100. For the Violet students, it made more of an impact for them to get a higher teacher evaluation than they expected. For the Lavender students, it made more of an impact for them to get an overall lower grade than they expected. And then for the 3 students who exactly matched my evaluation, they scored a 92% or higher on their evaluation when the class average was 79%. There were a few outliers in this data. There were students who scored much lower than they gave themselves and then still felt great about their musicianship. And then there were students who received higher from me than they rated themselves and still felt poorly about their musicianship that day. These varying responses are important for me to consider as I think about how some students are just more sensitive to negative performance evaluations than others, and that giving feedback, while crucial, should be bite-sized and actionable and timely. Within the trio work, I also wanted students to continue considering how they were rehearsing with one another and what to do when they have musical challenges and how they were going about problem solving. Violet had a greater variety of responses, but as seen here, they were often less specific, answering things like, "We practiced a lot." So, my research findings. How did all of this impact their self-efficacy? As far as what improved their confidence when performing, they had a lot of time and space for positive feedback from peers. They had frequent performance opportunities, both in front of each other and in front of peers that were younger than them, and then having the opportunity to perform in front of their family and teachers and the school. And they also had short, low-risk solo opportunities. You saw how quick the question and answer was, and that was at the end of the year. So at the beginning of the year, it was even faster. So small successes to build up to a longer solo. As far as how they view success in the music classroom, self-efficacy is not only task-specific, but it is so highly individualized by student. But there were some trends. You can see here the top 5 growth areas and questions by the Violet group. They measured their success in a more individualistic way. How they took a solo, how they were evaluated, or if they were complimented by me, how it made them feel, and how they compared to others. The Lavender students valued working together in a small ensemble to increase their success. You see how they use other music students as models. They watch others with similar music ability and decide if they could perform the same piece of music or not. So the same activities, the same pieces, the same strategies I implemented with both groups, the students all interpreted and internalized them differently. As far as my overall research question, I gave the MPSCS again in May. And there was an overall increase in both classes. There were no more students in the bottom, the red range, that was the 0 to 25 rating, and only 16% of students in the 26 to 50 range. They went up in every subcategory too. The 2 classes had different results within subcategories. The Violet had the most increase in inactive mastery, but also a big gain in vicarious experience, and then verbal social not far behind. For the Lavender group, their largest growth was a tie between physiological state and vicarious experience. And I was happy to see the physiological state because after they talked so much about stage fright, we did do a lot with like citing a mantra and how to use calming strategies and different ways to make them feel less nervous. Students in both classes remained with the verbal and social persuasion as their highest category, both at the beginning and at the end of the year, which makes sense to me because as a middle school, or they are often so focused on what their peers think of them and what others think of them. Overall, 83% of students made gains in the Violet group, and 63% of students made gains in the Lavender group. Some students did drop, but mostly they stayed within the same tier of the 0 to 25 or the 26 to 50. There were 4 students who went down a tier. And so I know like I'll have to keep a watch out. Those are my next steps, to like keep a watch out for those students to try and improve those ones who dropped significantly. And I do think that overall, I preempted a drop in the 6th to 7th grade year, but of course things change in middle school and I have to keep working on this with them. My policy recommendations are not just for music teachers, not all of them. I do think it's a great idea for middle school teachers to use evidence-based self-rating scales to be aware of how they're thinking about your content and what they can do, because self-efficacy can predict whether or not they persist through a challenging task. Building up middle school students with teacher praise still matters. They still care about what we say and what we think about their performance, even if they might say otherwise. And then the feedback piece, really teaching explicitly students how to listen and what to listen for, and how to give effective feedback to their peers. Giving them opportunities to watch and evaluate themselves, even if it's cringy, direct quote, this is cringy. And then varied feedback does build performance self-efficacy, at least in music. So they need to hear that feedback from their teachers. They need to hear it from their peers, from younger students and their families. It really does build them up and support them. As far as the school and district level, providing a dedicated space, you saw how much space my content takes up, and that's really important to be able to do everything that we can do musically. Scheduling support and flexibility, I could not have done those sharing sessions without that. And then also extended day pay to allow for time for those formal and informal sharings and performances. As a school leader, cultivating a culture of feedback and metacognition throughout the school day. And then, as I said, the amount of students that I had and the amount of time that I see them, right? Like class sizes being 30 or 28 is a lot to be able to give meaningful and timely teacher feedback. At the state or national level, I'm always going to advocate for prioritizing the fine and performing arts in every budget, and then also including discussion of self-efficacy and teacher training programs. So that's all I have for you. Thank you for listening. I look forward to hearing your feedback and maybe being able to get back onto the Zoom. There we go.
Please give her some audible. She seems to be someone who enjoys rhythm, so I'm sure she'd like some of that. In fact, you have just inspired my 2-year-old Malcolm, just pulled out his drum and was banging on it 3 minutes ago. So thank you. For any percussive sounds that you hear are him throwing all of his percussion instruments on the floor. I would like to direct our attention to a first question that we had in the public chat. It was a question around the physiological state. Specifically, did you try the Superman pose? And I'd also broaden it out. Like, what are some other techniques that you used? You know, like, is it something that our first grader friends would use that we could use if we're having anxiety?
Yeah, so we watched a video from a bass player who was a professional musician, because their view was like, oh, professional musicians don't get stage fright. And I was like, oh, yes, they do. Let me find a video for you. So he talked about how the use of a mantra, right? And I didn't do the Superman pose with them because that wasn't one of the things in the video. I just pulled directly from there. Using a mantra, a lot of the things that we tell them to calm down and to have a calming state. And then also like visualizing how you're going to feel at the end. And I think for some of them, not having had a lot of experience performing because of the pandemic, potentially, right? Because we had to go off of performance or live performances for a while. They couldn't remember what that felt like. But now I feel like they know what it feels like to be done, and that relief and pride in your performance. And so just envisioning the end and remembering how it feels to have done something well.
Thank you. I have a question that connects to, I think, some of the policy recommendations that you were sharing. So, you know, I was a math teacher, and I would have my kind of explicit math goals, and then I would have all of my implicit other goals. You're a music teacher. You clearly are very much a content expert here. Talking to some of us who have more of an elementary background, where it's more explicitly a holistic approach. So for you, as you were going through this research, do you feel like anything changed for you as a content teacher? Like, did it change how you thought about your goals for your students as you were conducting this research?
Yeah, and you know, in 20 minutes, I couldn't say all of the things, but I feel like the part of what changed is, or just reminded me of, a lot of times in middle school, we get into a lot of ensemble directed whole class. Like we're going to work on this piece because we're going to be performing it, and we're going to have a whole class, you know, rehearsal together. But just remembering that like students can learn from each other, and it's so great for them to learn from each other. So I can send them out of the room and they can go work with a partner. They can go work with a small group, and they can be working on the skills that we're working on. It doesn't have to be me being the expert all of the time, and just being reminded of that, even, you know, when we're getting into more complicated things, they can still support each other.
Thank you. I do want to open up the floor if there's anyone who'd like to share a question or a comment verbally. I'm going to give you a little wait time. Spell hippopotamus in my head.
Yeah, I'd like you to speak a little bit, because we had a chance to talk about it some, what you attribute the differences in your two different classes' perceptions of success to.
Yeah, so the violet class being the classical group and the lavender group being the STEAM group, the classical group had more of that individualistic sense. And I think some of that is the pressure that they put on themselves. Some of that is just the individualistic nature. And a lot of times they were the ones that had, like, if I had 30 responses, I would have like 20 different ones. They just had a lot of variety. The STEAM students, I feel like, and actually I can say this because Miss Ducius is here and I hope she won't mind me sharing this, but like the way that a lot of students who might have a learning disability or might have, struggle with something, they learn how to use each other. They learn how to do the things in spite of whatever problem that they might have. And so a lot of times they're more willing to look out and reach out to another person, whereas sometimes those students who often get things really quickly right away, have more of a set or fixed mindset. And so sometimes that can contribute to their soloistic, like the way that they consider what is success.
Thank you. That's just fascinating stuff and so important to know.
Thank you.
I want to open it up for anybody else who has a question they want to share into the group. Malcolm has a question. Okay, then I have one last question that stems from Deb's question. So you're in a school where there's clearly this kind of parallel track that's occurring. What do you think would happen if, like, in a music class they were mixed?
Yeah, so we're gonna do that social experiment next year. We are moving more to an elective model. And I think it's going to be really, really good for all of our students to have the ability to work with students of different ranges of abilities, musically, artistically, in PE, in all of their elective classes, because of exactly what I said, right? They can learn from each other. And a lot of times, this is another thing that the art teacher and I, Mr. Cias and I have talked about, is like they're in the same class with each other all day long. And it will be really great for them to be able to be with some other people just for the help that provides, and like having social problems fizzle sometimes because they aren't with each other all day long.
And maybe next year you'll come back, do another action research project and tell us about it.
Yeah.
Or do it somewhere and tell us about it. We would love to be able to hear about that in the future. All right, let's give Leah one more round of applause. However it is that you also celebrate your students in their classroom. And then we are going to turn it over to another, and I apologize, we're hitting the witching hour over here in toddlerdom. But I'm going to turn it over to another awesome mom and teacher who I know, who I think is maybe going to forgive me some of this extra noise right now. I've had the pleasure of working with Liz on, this is now the second time I'm going to get to hear one of her action research projects. Liz is an amazing, Liz Needleman at the Pulaski International School is an amazingly thoughtful and energetic veteran teacher. And she's going to be speaking about something that I've only started to hear about, which is this like incredibly large shift in literacy instruction. And so like what happens when you're told that this is something that you need to do as a teacher? How do you approach that, especially if you've been doing it differently for a very long period of time? So I'm really looking forward to hearing Liz talk to us about how are we going to write now with our primary students? Take it away, Liz. I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Kate. Yes, it is a really exciting time in early literacy. Let me just get this sorted. Okay, so good evening. My name is Elizabeth Needleman, and welcome to What's Right in Writing Today, also known as an exploration of first grade writing in a post-balanced literacy world. We'll come back to this in a minute, but if you're a primary teacher or a New York Times reader, you might already be familiar with the hubbub surrounding early literacy right now and the science of reading. I teach at Pulaski International School in Bucktown, where over 60% of our population identifies as Latinx, and over 75% of our students qualify for free or reduced lunch. While these are the demographics of my school, my classroom looks quite different. Pulaski houses the regional gifted program for students whose home language is Spanish. Our neighborhood has experienced significant gentrification over the last 10 years, and this change in demographics is more evident in the primary grades. As you can see, my class is mostly comprised of students who identify as white or biracial Asian and white. Now back to that post-balanced literacy world I mentioned earlier. For decades, teachers, including myself, have been asking children to use strategies like picture power to read unfamiliar words. That means look at the picture and make a good guess about what you think that word might be. We've taught them to memorize lists of sight words. We've filled our classrooms with cozy reading nooks and soft lighting. Many of us believed that children would naturally learn to read if they were surrounded by high-quality literature and developed a love of reading. Well, the cognitive scientists who brought us brain mapping determined the best way to help struggling readers is through systematic phonics instruction. Yes, there are still words in English that don't follow spelling patterns, but the majority of words do, and children need to be taught those patterns. Now that that's sorted, we'll get back to my question, which is, how do we teach writing knowing what we now know about reading? Writing has been taught using the Lucy Calkins method of writer's workshop in the city of Chicago and across the country for the last 20 years or so. The approach goes something like this. The teacher models an attribute of writing for about 5 minutes. One example is writing words in bold print to draw a reader's attention. Then the children turn and talk to their partner about what they're going to write that day. Next, they have independent writing for 10 to 20 minutes, followed by 2 or 3 children reading aloud what they've written that day. For years, I've heard criticism from English language learner teachers, as well as special education teachers. The format is too loose. There isn't enough scaffolding or support. There are almost no graphic organizers, and grammar is an afterthought that may or may not be included. My students wrote pages and pages of kachagugu writing that was occasionally readable to them. While I always had a few children who were able to churn out some interesting stories, it always felt like writing would just come naturally to them later on when they learned how to read naturally. So when I came to understand that the way I taught reading was fundamentally flawed, I began to question whether the way I taught writing was also wrong. It brought me to the question I examined this year and will share with you tonight. As I tried to rethink writing, I began by examining what I'm using in my classroom this year. One component of the shift in phonics-focused instruction is practicing what the students are learning with dictation. Using whiteboards or in journals, my students write the sounds that I dictate to them. I then move on to words that exemplify the phonics principle of the unit, and finally whole sentences. I wanted to know if they would be able to generalize the phonics principles and sentence construction rules when they're working on writing outside of the specific time of our classroom dictation and whole class phonics instruction. After reading Wexler's The Knowledge Gap and following that by reading into a program called The Writing Revolution, I wanted to know how my students' vocabulary might be impacted by more rigorous science and social studies content. In her books, Wexler recommends that we as educators must give children something to write about. This notion was another break from the Lucy Calkins workshop model, where children are expected to mind their own lives for content. One of the things I learned from the Writing Revolution was to first focus on sentence construction and build up to larger pieces like paragraphs. I also learned to use sentence frames to dig deeper and increase the rigor of what children are learning in science and social studies. Finally, with all this extra writing and phonics that's focused on mechanics and building vocabulary and content areas, I wanted to see how this would impact their writing done during our designated writing time. Dictation. Dictation synthesizes the 3 word form processes of word writing: phonological, orthographic, and morphological. In phonological word form, the student is listening to the sounds of a spoken word. This is where we teach children to tap out k, p. In orthography, the child uses letters to write those sounds down. In morphological tasks, the child examines word parts for the root word and suffixes or prefixes. In this picture, you can see how the children have separated the word cupcake into 2 syllables. They then wrote the sounds and labeled the second syllable as having a long vowel, A. The symbol VE shows a vowel combined with a silent E, and they've circled the letter S at the end, which morphologically indicates that the word is plural. In this next picture, you can see kids mapping the short vowel sound in dad, circling the suffix of ed, indicating the past tense morphology of the word insist, and there's a squiggly line under the digraph in this. While it's great to see that the children were able to show what they knew about orthography and morphology during a dictation lesson, I needed to see if they were able to generalize what they learned and apply it in their writing, given a simple writing prompt. Each month, I assigned a picture prompt writing piece and examined what mechanics and spelling patterns the children were implementing. My thought was that if I took the cognitive load from inventing a story and let the children focus more on how they wrote, I'd get to see what mechanics they were able to utilize. Here you can see that in November, 11 of 16 writing samples showed students using vowels in their words, with 3 kids putting spaces between words and using punctuation, and 7 including blends in their writing and correctly spelling sight words that had been taught. By late April, all of the writing samples included spaces, vowels, and blends and digraphs. From these samples of writing, I could see consistent growth in how the children were able to utilize the phonics principles they had learned in our phonics class, and that they were implementing them in their generalized writing. After reading Wexler's The Knowledge Gap, a few colleagues and I decided to invest in a social studies curriculum from Core Knowledge. For first grade, that meant we studied ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia and Egypt, along with the early inhabitants of the Americas, followed by the English colonists. Based on what I had learned from reading The Writing Revolution, I began using the sentence frame because, so, because, but, so. First, I had my students orally express some of what they'd learned, and then they could write a summary as we concluded our lesson. Here are a few examples of the because, but, so writing my students did when we were deep diving into our work. Mesopotamia was a great civilization because they had cuneiform, but the rules were harsh, so the king protected the people. Sea turtles can defend themselves because they have shells, but they have to watch out for sharks, so they can survive and lay eggs. And finally, English settlers wanted to go to the New World to get the loot because their king told them to get the loot, but they got stuck in the ocean for 6 weeks. So they could get gold and silver. They came and got rich, and the king could get very rich too. At 3 points in the year, October, January, and May, I administered an expressive vocabulary assessment, which was generously loaned to me by my speech therapist husband. In the individually administered assessment, I presented each child with a picture and they named it. There's only one correct response for each picture, and the administrator can't give any hints. For example, for the illustration of the thermometer, the child is marked incorrect if they say temperature taker, or if they say horsefoot rather than hoof. My students did well in their initial assessment, so much so that I was concerned that by the end of the year, I wouldn't be able to see much growth. But by May, I was shocked to discover how much my students' vocabularies had improved over the course of the year. In blue, you can see the number of children in each percentile ranking from the beginning of the year, and red is where they ended the year. At the beginning of the year, 6 kids were below the 50th percentile in expressive vocabulary. And by May, only 1 remained. When we started the year, 4 children tested in the 90th percentile or higher. And by May, 13 of the 23 students were in the 90th or above percentile rank. Separate from the writing and phonics dictation and the additional writing in science and social studies, the children also had writing standards that must be met in first grade. These standards include narrative, nonfiction, and opinion writing. To see the impact of our year-long work outside of our designated writing time, I compared pieces written at different times in the year. First, we'll hear narrative writing. In the beginning of the year, I used a Lucy Calkins Writer's Workshop unit, where students examined their own lives and wrote a short story. This year, I added to my usual instruction by creating a graphic organizer with 3 spaces to indicate beginning, middle, and end of the story. This child is going to share his narrative written in November. You might want to pump up the volume a bit because he's very soft-spoken.
The time I went to a soccer game, I got a pretzel. The time I went.
So here's what he wrote the first time. In the spring, we returned to the narrative writing structure, and the kids created a realistic fiction character and wrote a series of stories based on that character. What you're about to see is his first book in that series, and this piece was written in April.
Giddy is a 9-year-old. He likes the beach. One day, Giddy went for a swim. Oh no, Mommy, the waves are too big. I cannot swim in those big waves. I will go to the lifeguard. Hey, Mr. Lifeguard, can you help me be a more powerful swimmer? No, but I can give you swimming lessons. When does it start? Tomorrow. Okay, let me get my mama. Do you have to use money? Yes. Okay, I will get money. Sounds good. Hey, Mom, can I do swimming lessons? Sure. Do you need money? Yes. Okay. How much money will to go? I'll go at the life. Hey, Mr. Lifeguard, how much money? $5. Okay, I'll get $5. Hey, hi. Hey, Mom, give me $5. Just give me $5. Here's $5. Thanks. Mr. Lifeguard, I have your $5. Stop calling me Mr. Lifeguard. What should I call you, Mr. Nobody? You should call me Jerry. Okay, anyways, here's your $5. Thanks. Hey, Mr. Lifeguard, it's my bedtime, so I'm going to sleep. See you tomorrow. Hey, Mom, let's go to Mr. Lifeguard. Okay, isn't he at the beach? Yeah, whatever, just drive. Hey, Mr. Lifeguard, stop calling me Mr. Lifeguard. Next morning, finally, I am a more powerful swimmer. In the Giddy is a 9.
As you can see, he added lots of dialogue. The story takes place over some time, and he created and solved a problem, and it was pretty funny. From January through February, I taught a classic Calkins opinion writing unit, where children wrote about their collections and restaurant reviews. In May, following a social studies unit about how artists express themselves, the children chose a piece they had created and wrote an opinion piece about why they had chosen that piece as their favorite. My students showed significant growth from their initial final opinion piece in the Calkins unit to their new opinion piece based on the art unit. I think that after having learned about techniques artists use to express themselves, the children were better able to express why they liked their chosen pieces. They knew more, so they wrote more. Here's a look at a Yayoi Kusuma inspired pumpkin piece and the opinion that a student wrote about it. So now let's take a moment and think about the first word that pops in your head when you think about writing. I asked my students to do the same thing, and their responses came back that writing helps them to think and learn ideas. I doubt my previous years of students would have thought of writing in the same way. As is the nature of education research, I can't say that the work I did with my class was the only reason for their impressive growth, as I didn't have a control group. My school is lucky to have a strong parent association who supplied our primary teachers with the Wilson Foundation's program and additional support materials like supplemental decodable texts, and my students benefited greatly from those resources. And finally, unless teachers are willing to give up some autonomy about what they teach, having a dictated, vertically aligned curriculum could be a challenging sell to some educators. So what should writing look like in first grade? We as teachers must not rush into narrative writing the first week of school. Give kids time to develop the ability to write sentences before we overwhelm them with the expectation of writing whole stories. Give kids content to write about. It helps them examine what they're learning. Give kids time to practice those spelling patterns, to write words, and an opportunity to practice writing sentences where the cognitive load is focused on spelling rather than crafting the thought. Implementation of dictation has profoundly impacted my students. While it's certainly frustrating for those who struggle, it has also helped them tremendously with their writing and their reading. At first, my colleagues and I feared that the strong readers would be bored by the phonics instruction, but I found that even though my strong readers were great decoders, some still needed practice with the encoding of many sounds, and practicing those rules daily is building the foundation they need to learn to spell. Teachers must think outside the box when it comes to writing time. Including writing in science and social studies has helped my students understand so much of what they've learned this year, and it clearly had a significant impact on their expressive vocabulary. And finally, kids need reason to write, either to process information or to tell their ideas. It shouldn't just be about filling up pages. It's wonderful that my school was able to purchase the Wilson phonics curriculum. I feel lucky. However, it should not be limited to a few well-off schools. I hope to see strong programs like this one available to teachers across Chicago. We should not have to rely on supplemental funds from parent organizations to acquire materials to teach our students. Teachers need content-rich social studies and science materials, and we need vertical alignment. We should not need to supplement our classrooms with cute things we find on Teachers Pay Teachers. It's time that elementary schools took the time to ensure that children are getting a solid foundation in science and social studies content, so they're able to build knowledge and vocabulary. And finally, it's lovely that you came here today to catch glimpses of what goes on in the classrooms of my amazing fellow presenters. But wouldn't it be powerful for teachers to regularly be able and encouraged to go into others' classrooms? We need time to learn from one another, not just from the folks in our school, but in other parts of the city as well. We need to build up our community of educators and help nurture the bonds that programs like these start. Thank you so much for your time. And please let me know if you have any questions.
My jaw was just dropping further and further and further as your student was reading their story. So thank you so much for sharing all of that, like to be able to have the students' full language and full text be part of your story, and for sharing everything about the journey that you just took. I think I was coming in being like, oh, they're going to tell her what to do, and we're going to see her thoughts on that. And just the way that you were able to turn this into such a rich experience for your students is really, really phenomenal. I would like to start us off by opening the floor to anybody who would like to share a question or a comment from the audience. I see two hands. I saw, is it Neem?
Neve, hello. I was really interested in this because I've taught I'm endorsed in all subjects of middle school, and I just see, without a doubt, writing is the most underdeveloped skill. I've taught gifted, I've taught bilingual, like it's hardly ever do you get students who are on grade level with writing and who can meet the writing standards, and it feels impossible. So I really appreciated your cross-curricular approach, and I think that's something that's just missing throughout, in that they get to me and I'm teaching science, but I'm expecting you to do so much writing, but you don't have that, you don't have that stamina built up. You don't know how to use the content language, and we don't give enough space to how writing is necessary in the content. I know that wasn't your main focus, but I really love how you used it, because it's one of my personal gripes. So you really just touched me personally. Not a question, but thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm real sorry about the middle schoolers who are not that great at writing yet. But don't worry, we're going to develop that and it's going to be fine. You're dealing with a lot of kids who experienced a lot of Calkins writing. Like, it's going to be fine. They're just going to feel it and get better at it. Sorry.
Or no writing, which I think is worse than Calkins. Like getting no writing instruction is worse than having Calkins. Like Calkins is better than nothing.
I think it intimidates a lot of people.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. I have a question or comment from Sonia.
Hi, I'm not a teacher at all, but it's funny that this week I listened to an episode of The Daily that talked about Lucy Culkin. I think that was her name. So this is pretty timely. I knew nothing about her and school was a really long time ago, learning to read and write, but it was really interesting to watch the progression in your students with the writing, because writing it's always been enjoyable for me. And it was great to watch that little kid read his story, which was interesting and fun and actually had a plot development and everything. I really enjoyed your presentation about the reading and writing. It's not really a question, but I found myself really perking up when I heard the name mention of Culkin. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
A question that I'd like to share from the audience is, where were there places of tension for you as you were incorporating a technique that seems at least new in the mix? I don't know, had you done things like this in the past? We see these cycles in education. And what did you learn about yourself and find yourself needing to shift as a teacher?
Oh yeah, so I actually started my teaching career at the school where Lucy Calkins worked with teachers, because I started teaching right outside of New York City. And so the teachers that I first started teaching with were the ones who helped develop the Art of Teaching Writing book that Lucy Calkins wrote in the late 80s. And so I have only ever taught writing via Lucy Calkins. But with all of the changes that we're doing with the science of reading, with teaching kids how to read differently, it just seems like this is not the right way to continue going forward with writing. So basically it was kind of like the rug got pulled out from underneath me over the summer, and some colleagues and I were just kind of like, oh my God, what should we do? What should writing look like? And it was a very much building the plane while we were flying it, making stuff up all year. And so I was very uncomfortable the whole time. And I'm still kind of thinking about how this is going to look next year at school.
Yeah, that's a big shift. Last question that I have for you from the audience was, how did you come up with the specific interventions that you used, such as bringing in science and social studies? Any other particular interventions that you used? Did they come from a curriculum, or was it a combination with your experience?
So there was a recently published book called The Knowledge Gap, and it talks about how there is a deficit of knowledge in kids in the United States, that it impacts their reading comprehension, that because they are not developing and learning things, because we've decided to teach kids to learn how to read by taking away the content in science and social studies and saying, okay, now we're going to talk about the main idea. And then kids learn, okay, the main idea of a book about trains, the main idea of the book about comets, and it's just very disjointed. And so The Knowledge Gap by Natalie Wexler suggests that teachers need to increase the amount of content that we're teaching kids. And then she and another educator wrote the Writing Revolution, which is a K through 12 conceptual kind of a book that talks about using this because, but, so frame throughout curriculum. So using it to explain decimals and how that is connected to fractions. Yeah, it's really amazing. Yeah. So that was pretty impactful. And so with the help of my colleagues, being able to talk about it and workshop it, and lots of coffee breaks where we kind of said so what does this look like? And how is this going to be different? That was sort of how it came about. But there's no curriculum really to speak of, except for it's something called the Red Schoolhouse, I think. It's a dyslexic school in Chicago. I'm saying the wrong thing, so if Sarah Harris wants to jump in and say what I'm mistakenly attributing to them, she's welcome to do that. But it looks like John Willard wants to say something.
Please.
Hello. So I'm based out of Florida. I'm a youth library associate, and I work in my local library. And we're doing summer reading right now, as far as bringing kids in from the summer and encouraging reading. I'm just curious how your presentation And all the techniques you suggested, maybe you could incorporate like working with the community and libraries, local libraries, because we do a lot of literacy programs and story times and working with kind of, you know, students and helping them and homeschool students that come to our library and use our resources. Do you find any kind of collaboration with the schools and the teachers and also with the local library to kind of help students with their writing skills?
No, because I didn't think that I knew what I was doing. But I would be certainly happy to, you know, it's Redwood literacy. Thanks, Sarah. So I'm more than happy to be a thought partner with anyone. Now that I kind of feel like I have some justification for what I'm talking about. So that sounds like a great idea. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, much appreciated. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's give it up one more time for Liz. Thank you so much. And thank you too for your students. We got a chance to hear particularly your one student's multiple stories. So thank you for sharing their voice. I did a very little bit of math and realized that our 4 teachers here have combined almost a century of teaching experience. So I think that might be something that ties the presenters that we have tonight. The fact that they have been working so long in this field. They have so much expertise and they are still willing to say something like Liz just said, which I didn't think that I knew what I was talking about. The willingness to be like new to something and say, I'm curious about this. I want to figure this out. And this is something that I am seeing as I'm looking at Jennifer Ashford's project. I think that this kind of combination between so many years of experience and also the willingness to be like, I'm doing something that feels very new to me. And how am I going to make sure that my students are able to have the best experience possible? And how can I take the expertise that I have to do that? So I'm very excited to introduce our final presenter of the evening, Jennifer Ashford, who teaches at Langford Elementary. She has been teaching for 23 years. I think you are the longest term teacher that we have presenting tonight, and is looking particularly at how we can incorporate play into early primary classes in order to support that transition into the elementary space where it can feel a lot more content driven than it does at the early childhood level. So without further ado, let's give it up for our final presenter of the evening, last but certainly not least, Jennifer Ashford.
Thank you, Kate. Can somebody just let me know when they see my screen, please?
We see
it. All right, thank you. All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Ashford, and my research paper is on propelling play, finding the balance between academics and play-based learning. Like Kate said, I currently work at Langford Elementary School, which is located in West Englewood. It's on the southwest side of Chicago, Illinois. There are approximately 181 students. 93% of those students are African American, about 6% Hispanic, and 1% Caucasian. 97% of our students are low income and receive free lunch. And we currently have a 92.4 attendance rate, which is a big increase from what it previous was at 89%. Langford is one of the top schools in a network of 27. The West Englewood neighborhood is a neighborhood impacted by violence and trauma. And to help combat that, Langford provides support programs like a drama club and active student council. And we also have partnerships with the YMCA for after school students, to serve the students for after school. Like Kay said, I've been working for about 23 years. And of those 23, I've been teaching for 18 years in pre-K. I've been working in the Chicago Public Schools for about 5 years. And this research project is important to me because students of color are deprived of play more often because of low school performance. It's important to note that play deprivation can lead to dysregulation, inflexibility in thought, poor management, aggression, and it also tends to lead to fragile, shallow interpersonal relationships people build. Play is often substituted with academics, and the absence of play can create more classroom disruption and less achievement for students. This is particularly important to me because of my background as a pre-K teacher and then transition into kindergarten and first grade. I noticed that a lot of my students seem to be disengaged when changing that play-based environment. To better understand the need for play in classrooms, it would be helpful to look at the timeline of play and its history in education. Play was founded in 1837 by Friedrich Frögl, who in Germany. Kindergarten day consisted of songs, nature studies, stories, and dramatic play. In 1957, there was a launching of the Sputnik satellite by the Soviets. The US hoped to accomplish this task first. So in 1958, they spent $1 billion on the National Defense Education Act for high quality teaching. The focus for that teaching was math, science, and foreign languages. This became a catalyst for the push of academics in 1960, when reading, writing, and math was incorporated in kindergarten. And in 1998 to 2010, those reading, writing, and math practices increased while play decreased. In 1960, those practices were only for about 2 hours a day. In 2002 to 2015, the No Child Behind Act was a law that for K-2 gen ed in US, this law held schools accountable for how kids learned and achieved, but it penalized schools that didn't show improvement. This also put more pressure on academics being pushed down on students. In 1966, a psychiatrist, Dr. Stuart Brown, was hired to investigate the cause of a University of Texas shooter murdering the classmates on a campus shooting. He discovered during an interview that the shooter experienced play deprivation. Brown concluded the presence or absence of play in child development has a great deal to do with competency, resiliency, emotional health, and brain size. Play is an inherent part of our human nature. The instinct to play is built into our biology. We have play circuits that create our play nature. These are the preferences we have when we play, and it leads to the development of our play personality. Our play nature is as unique as our fingerprints. It is important to note the type of play from our research that it focuses on, because there are many types. I will focus on educational play. Educational play is initiated, controlled, paced, terminated, and assessed by the teacher. It allows guided, child-initiated activities and a teacher-directed play. The teachers do not disrupt this play or take over, and it helps build relationships and negotiations with teachers, students, and their peers. My research question: how can I best engage my kindergarten students with a curriculum that is student-centered, play-based, and prepares them for a first grade academic curriculum? Because of this research question, I developed 3 sub-questions. How can I create a classroom community that fosters independence? Does more play result in a classroom environment that is more collaborative and engaging to students? And what are parents' perceptions of play-based learning, and how do these change over the course of a school year? The participants for my study, I have a classroom of 19 kindergarten students, 12 girls and 7 boys. 90% of my students are African American, 5% Hispanic, and 5% Caucasian. During these participants, I selected 3 focus students to interview. These are my focus students. KB is a student that is excited to participate. She often raises her hand to answer questions, but they're often wrong. She does not seek help, and she struggles with routines and procedures. She needs lots of reminders. She's often disengaged in class, often staring off, and she rarely completes her work. She usually requires one-on-one assistance to help her. TF is a student with fine motor weaknesses. Because of his fine motor weaknesses, he has an inability to write, and he often gets frustrated because of that. Math is a strength for him. He also, like KB, needs a lot of one-on-one assistance to help complete work. And GM is a student that seeks attention in negative ways. He often falls asleep in class and displays inappropriate behaviors with his peers. He has some understanding of counting concepts, but he doesn't know his numbers. He uses a number line to help him remember them. He also needs help completing work one-on-one. These are the collection tools I use to track student data over the course of my research. I will be reviewing these tools in this presentation. It's important to note that the data collection tools that were most helpful in my research were the culture and climate surveys and the student engagement surveys, and also the observational videos. I use these tools to make changes to implement additional surveys and activities throughout my research. The first survey was developed by our culture and climate team at our school. It was distributed to all of the students at the school in October. I gave that survey to 16 of my 20 students in my classroom. The survey uses emojis to indicate whether a student feels happy, sad, or okay, and there were 7 survey stems. The survey stems were, I feel happy, sad, or okay on my way to school, in class, completing classwork, on the playground, when I think about my peers, when I think about my teacher, and when I think about school. I focused on classwork because I noticed when we looked at the data that only 7 students indicated that they felt happy completing schoolwork, and that was problematic for me. 4 students said they were sad, 5 students said they felt okay. For comparison purposes, I also included the playground data, and I want to take note that of these survey questions, most of the students said they felt happiest on the playground, which is an indication that play is necessary. I also recorded observational notes in my journals. These are the words that stood out to me. I began to wonder, if students don't feel good about completing classwork, how could they feel successful as students long-term? This led to my first sub-question. How can I create a classroom community that fosters independence? This is a photograph that I took when I initially rolled out Play in my classroom. I started with, I don't know if most of you remember this, the telephone game. The telephone game was when you whisper a phrase or word in someone's ear, and then we just passed the word around until we got to the end, and then the last person will call out the word or phrase to see if we got the word correctly. I wanted to take this photo so we can look at the students in the picture. One of the things that you should notice is their engagement. Most of the students are looking intensely at what's happening. They're smiling, so they're having fun. And also they have self-regulation behaviors. I didn't have to remind anybody to be quiet, to pay attention, to sit down. And they were also developing skills like turn taking, listening, and building oral language. I created my own survey called the Student Engagement Survey in November. When I created this survey, I wanted to focus on activities students enjoyed during the day. So I picked specific intervals about the day. I also used the same emojis from the Culture and Climate Survey so that the survey was familiar to the students. And the 3 areas I focused on were morning meetings, small group, and workbooks, which are indicated in the chart by the color bands. What I want to do is take note of the yellows, because the yellows are how students felt about workbooks. When we look at workbooks, 8 students said they felt happy about completing workbooks. 1 person said they felt okay, but 11 students said they felt sad. My analysis of this were, if students felt sad about workbooks, how could I incorporate play so they can have positive experiences when completing their work? So this is a video that I'm about to play. The disclaimer, when the video plays, the audio is not very loud because the students are kind of shy, but I want us to focus more on the students and how they're engaged during this activity. A little background about the video. Two of the students had had a disagreement the previous day in class. Another student told me about it. He said they were calling each other names. When he told me what happened, I didn't want to focus on the two students in particular, but I wanted to create a game where we all displayed relationship building, where we could complement each other. So they were given some simple instructions to give each other a compliment and to end their compliment with some kind of dismissal greeting, like a handshake, high five, an elbow bump. I modeled playing the game with the teacher assistant that was in my room, just so they could have an example of what it would look like.
I like your shoes. I like your name. Thank you.
Loose. London.
I like your bows. Thank you. I like your shoes. Thank you.
Treasure. Sydney. I also want to make mention that I used popsicle sticks, so it was totally random who they gave the compliment to. And then at the end, the two students that had a disagreement prior, I allowed them to come forward. But one of the things that I wanted to say is, if we watch that video, what did we see? We saw increased engagement. Again, few disruptions. It also was a game that initiated appropriate interactions with peers. It was adapted from student interest, and it also helped resolve conflict. Simply put, play doesn't always require materials. This also led to my second sub-question, which are, what are parents' perceptions of play-based learning, and how do these change over the course of a school year? I sent the survey out to the parents in November. I liked these questions because the first week of school, all the parents were adamant about, when are you giving out homework? When are you giving out homework? So before I rolled out this approach of learning through play, I wanted to see how they felt about it. In the survey, only 14 parents responded, and 13 parents said that they liked play, and one parent said they felt neutral about it. I also sent the open-ended question to parents, asking them, what were the benefits of play? And I coded the responses. This is what they had to say. What I wanted to make note of in my analysis of this data was, parents seem to understand the benefits of play, because a lot of them said that they knew that play allows students to retain information, learn a new strategy. What my wondering was, if most of my parents attended pre-K, were they familiar to play-based learning already? So because parents said that they were okay with play and they thought they were aware of the benefits, I decided to roll out some homework activities. Instead of giving students just dittos, I mixed up a combination of dittos and play-based assignments. So I sent initially, the first time, I sent 5 worksheet assignments and 5 play-based assignments. The photos are examples of the play-based assignments. I sent the directions of how to play the game. I also sent materials, and what I did was gave the parents options to complete either or. I wanted to see which assignment they preferred. So these are a few examples of what those play-based materials look like. They were games that required some interaction with someone, and they used dice to roll or coins to play, like bingo or add or subtract. Here are a few more examples. So students could roll a story where they created their own story by rolling a die. They could also play a memory game by reading sight words. They could also do beginning sounds by finding things in their houses and recording the beginning letter of each thing that they found. Here's the data from those tracking sheets. I collected them, I tallied them, and I wanted to see how many I received back. The blue indicates how many did a partial worksheet. The yellow indicate how many did the play-based, and the red indicated how many completed the entire worksheet. As we can see, only 6 people partially completed the packet. I'm sorry, 5 people. 6 people completed entire packet, but only 4 students completed play-based. And I thought this data conflicted with the information I received from the survey. So I sent out another homework assignment, but this time I sent out 4 ditto activities and I sent out 4 play-based games. Same thing, I sent the directions out. I also provided materials. And what I wanted to do was just track it and see if there would be an increase in more students completing play-based. When I totaled them up, 23 worksheets were completed and only 15 play-based games were completed. My analysis of this data was that most students completed dittos. So I sent out a survey to parents because I wanted to know why. I wanted to get more information about which homework assignment did they complete. I only received 7 responses from the parents. 6 people said that they completed both, and 1 parent said they completed the worksheet. I also asked parents, which one did they enjoy? 3 parents said they like play-based, 3 people said they like both. 1 parent said they like the worksheets. I also asked parents what prevented them from completing play-based. Only 1 parent responded that they didn't complete it because it was just piled up in their students' work, in their child's book bag, and they would get to it later. My analysis of this was parents said they understood the benefits of play-based, yet I wasn't receiving much homework back. I did send out 1 more assignment, and this time I gave 2 worksheets and 2 play-based assignments and gave them the option of only completing 1. And when I did that, only 1 person turned it in, so I didn't have enough data. So this shifted some questions in me. What were preventing the parents from filling out this homework? Could they not complete it because they wanted work students can do independently? Or did the play-based games require interaction with another person and it was something the parents weren't able to do at that time? My third sub-question, does more play result in a classroom environment that is more collaborative and engaging to students? In this video, we're just going to watch the students have some unstructured play, meaning I gave them some materials that were teacher directed, but unstructured meaning I did not intervene or disrupt. I just walked around and took observational notes to note what the students did in their interactions. One of the things that I want to note about that video, in my observations, did you see any disruptive behavior? No. Did you see students engage? Yes. And you can hear students counting because they're supporting each other. I saw them scaffolding. There were students who were kind of having difficulties doing some of the assignments, and students were going over helping them without any instruction from me. So this also created opportunities for them to problem solve. And again, like I said, support their peers and scaffold learning. I wanted to be more specific in my surveys because I wanted to create a classroom that was collaborative with my students. I wanted them to have some input in what they learned. So the next survey I sent out in February to my students, I was even more specific. Instead of me talking about intervals in a day, I talked about specific activities we did during the day. And I asked the students to indicate which activities they liked the most or the least. Instead of doing emojis, I actually put pictures of some of the activities we did in the classroom so they could select their choosing. The green indicates the activities the students like the most. The red indicates the activities students like the least. One of the things that I want to keep noting through this surveys was that when I collected the data, students said they did not like workbooks. That were their least favorite activities. 11 students said that they didn't like the workbooks for literacy. 8 students said they didn't like completing the workbooks in math. But when I looked at what their favorite activities were, they were games. 11 students said they loved the math games. And then some students said they loved writing the most. So my analysis of this is students just don't like workbooks. They prefer opportunities that are open-ended and involve play. The Culture and Climate sent out another survey to students in December. So I showed you this first one previously. Again, we're just focusing on schoolwork because I want to make sure that students feel confident in their abilities when they're doing their work. So in December, we surveyed the students and 17 students filled out this survey. 10 students said they felt happy about completing classwork. 5 students said they were sad and 2 students said they were okay. If I compare this survey to the first one, there was a little bit of increase because in October, 7 students said they were happy about completing homework. 5 students said they felt okay, and 4 students said they were sad. So there's a little bit of progress. So in the beginning, I showed you my 3 focus students. So I conducted interviews with them in March because I wanted to ask them, how did they feel about play? What activities did they like completing as students? So KB said that she loved math, but she had a hard time concentrating. She said she wanted the activities to be fun, require movement and engagement for her. She said that math was boring because the questions were too hard. TF said that he was confident about his abilities as a student. He was excited to learn and he found it challenging to read, but he couldn't wait to start. I also noted the similarities between the students. KB and TF both said that they love playing with Play-Doh. Again, they were interested in activities that caught creativity, that were open-ended, and that they can do movement with. But they both felt the work was hard in classroom. GM said he wanted to read, but he felt excluded in class. He said that because he didn't know how to read, he felt he couldn't participate in any of the activities. He said that learning was hard for him. And it go back to how I mentioned he often fell asleep. So I was thinking those behaviors prevented him from learning those skills, which is why he wasn't confident. When I looked at the similarities between KB and GM, I noticed again, they both wanted tangible activities that they could manipulate, but they did not feel confident in students. It's important to note that if students don't feel confident in their abilities, how can they be successful? My initial question was, how could I best prepare students for a first grade curriculum? So I interviewed the first grade teacher because I wanted to see her perceptions of play. The first question I asked her, well, what are the first grade skills necessary entering into your room? I quoted the responses and she listed 5 literacy skills and 2 math. So the literacy skills were know the alphabet, be able to decode CVC words, read sight words, write their names, write sentences. And for math skills, she said count to 20 and be able to add up to 10. The second question I asked her was if she thought play was beneficial. Her response was no. She said that play provided no structure. She didn't think that it could be turned off and on. She said that play could be used as a time for students to de-stress, but not during classroom time. My third question was if she provided any opportunities for play in her class. She said no. And then my wonderings of this was, she said that play had no structure. So I wanted to know if she had an understanding of what structure and unstructured play look like. I also wondered about the skills that she said she wanted children to be ready with. She mentioned academics, but she didn't mention self-regulation skills like cooperation, turn taking, sharing, managing behavior. I also wonder if educational level played a role in this, because when you're an early childhood teacher, we understand the benefits of play, but if you're an elementary school teacher, you don't know about it so much. So how did adding play impact my students' progress? The students do assessment throughout the year, I-ready testing. So I'm only going to focus on the data from September and May. So the coding for this is if it's yellow, students are 1 grade level below. If it's green, they are, sorry, my dog's bark, early on grade level. But if it's a striped green, they're mid or 1 grade level above. At the beginning of the school year, 16 students were 1 grade level below, and 3 students were mid or above grade level. At the end of the school year, I had 10 students mid or grade level above, 8 students early on grade level, and 1 student 1 grade level below. I also did the same data for math. Beginning of the year, there were 15 students 1 grade level below, 3 students early on grade level, and 1 student mid or above. At the end of the year, 7 students 1 grade level below, 3 students early on grade level, and 9 students mid or above grade level. So my conclusions were, play increased in my classroom. The academic impact of it was students were able to provide support to their peers, and we made some academic gains. Students displayed executive functioning skills. They were able to focus their attention more and plan and organize the play that happened in their classroom. Students were also able to build their SEL competencies. They were able to cooperate, take turns, share, and negotiate. So these are my policy recommendations. At the teacher level, I would like to implement play-based learning in all subject areas. At the school district level, I would like to see structured and unstructured play embedded in the blocks of learning. And at the national level, I would like curriculum to have opportunities for play-based learning at all grade levels. I wanted to add a note that in my research, I found out that there are schools where play is on the move in other districts. In New York, they're developing the play-based curriculum for first graders. In Texas, they developed a play-based curriculum for kindergarten and first graders. And they reported that giving the extra time for the students to play has caused significant increase in student performance in both reading and math. In Oklahoma, 3rd grade teacher integrated structured play, but she connects that play to something that they learn in school. Teachers have noticed that the play have helped students socially, emotionally, and behaviorally. In closing, I want to say that the most critical information obtained in my research was the damaging effects for students that they face due to the absence of play and an increase in academics. Students have a lack of social emotional learning and problem solving skills that naturally occur in play. The lack of skills cause an increase in classroom disruptions that interrupt learning for the entire class. The absence of play and the push for academics impacts student perception of later school success. If this continues, what would our school system look like for students in the future? Thank you. Questions?
Thank you so much, Jennifer. That, oh man. It's one of those things that feels like it should be a no-brainer, and yet it's consistently something that we need to convince people of. And many of the questions that people have been sharing with me to ask you do have to do with how we convince different people of the importance of play. And you may be preaching to the choir here, but I think we're still very interested in hearing how you would speak to these different stakeholders. Before that, I want to as Jennifer's looking through her kudos in the chat, a reminder to everyone, please make sure that you give Jennifer feedback, go back up further and give Liz feedback. I don't think I shouted that out. We also want to give Leah's feedback, make sure that they all have an opportunity to hear your glows and any questions that you have. So as we're, thinking about convincing different people, maybe the first group of people that are going to be closest to you are parents. And so a question from Neve was, did you have any worries about parents selecting the play-based homework, perhaps because there wasn't an accountability measure? Like, were they not really turning it in? They were selecting it, but not turning it in? Or were you asking for things like photos that were proof per se of turning it in?
Yeah, so that's how I got the photos. I gave them several options to turn in work. They could send photos, they could take videos, they can email me or text me. So that's how I was able to get those photos, which was another wondering. Sometimes one little thing is too much, so maybe the act of I got to take this photo, email it, text it, that could be another thing, because I think when you're doing homework, you want something that's quick, easy, simple. So sometimes that can be challenging. So it would have been better if I could have got a lot more parent participation, because out of 19 students, only 7 responded. So going into next year, that's something that I'm really going to make a big emphasis on at the beginning of the school year during our parent orientation, rolling out. This is my plan. This is the mission for play. This is what I want to see, because I want them to interact and have fun with it as well. Because obviously they know the benefits, right? So they see it, but it also goes into when I interviewed that kindergarten teacher, the first grade teacher, about structured and unstructured. So is it about understanding of play? Most people naturally think play is catch a ball, throw it, games, but it's different when you're doing something to demonstrate what children know and learn.
Thank you. So then going right off of that, if you're talking to teachers of slightly older students, significantly older students, what do you think it's going to take at the school level and beyond to convince them to appreciate the value of educational play?
I think, like I said, in that research, I was really surprised to see it on the move in other states and seeing it happening in 3rd grade. I think as an early childhood teacher, most teachers know. So pre-K to 2nd, 3rd grade is not as hard, but when you're talking about middle school, and the thing about it is, because play is embedded in me, I've taught like after school and summer programs, and I taught K through 8th, and all of my class opportunities were play. And what I noticed is when I taught the upper grade students, their creativity was diminished. Like when I gave them open-ended things, it was, I can't make it like this. Is only one way to do it. And I'm like, no, but when I taught the younger students, K through 3rd, they were very open-ended. They had all of these elaborate buildings out of popsicle sticks, and they had all these ideas, but again, the older students was like, it's only one way. So I think when I did do that program, what I noticed the following year, guess who was in my room asking to come see? All of the upper grade students was like, can we come in your room this year? It's fun, because I also think that we don't understand the pressures that they feel. They need opportunities to distress. That's why I focus on structured and unstructured. It's more than just recess. It allows them opportunities to discuss. Like I said in the video, I didn't intervene. They were having discussions about, this is a shape, this isn't a shape, this shape has this many, and I didn't say anything. It was just natural. So when you give them loose materials and just watch, you're going to see what they can discover in that learning. You can see what they know from that. I think it's just hard to push it, because we live in this assessment world where we need to measure, we need to measure, we need to measure. And I think it's just like when the parents have to turn in the photos, how do you accurately measure play? You got to sit and observe versus how can you record it through an assessment that they want to share, nationally. But it's possible. It's just a little bit more work. So I created observation sheets to note who didn't know shapes, who did know shapes, who didn't know these letters, who couldn't read. But it is a little bit more work than just giving a worksheet. But if you give students worksheets and they're not doing them, or they're frustrated, or they're saying the work is too hard, then that lets you know it's not working. So we are entering into this world. We want students to kind of be collaborative in what they learn. If they're saying they like playing, why are we not weaving that into their curriculum?
I feel like you're firing everybody up here.
I'm fired.
And I know that everyone's probably like, ooh, I want to go play. I do want to leave us with one last question because we have a hand up from Loretta Walton, and I want to make sure she's able to ask her question or give her comment.
Really, I have more of a comment than a question, because she was really saying what I was going to say too, is that it's a lot more working in setting up things for the students to play. And most of my colleagues used to say that, you know, they didn't know how to do it, and worksheets and things of that nature were much easier for them. And so they didn't, you know, plan to do the play type. But I think it's also showing in our society that we have lost what we need to help students and grown-ups, because they missed out on so much of that.
Especially when the research is saying that it is in our DNA. It doesn't matter how old you are. We're innately born with these play circuits. We have them because it's something that's innate. So we want to be able to play.
Right. And so they missed a lot of that coming up.
And even as an adult, like if you think about play, we all have our fondest memories, right?
Right.
And those are important to us. It makes us smile. I mean, play, when I'm with my family, we play a game as an icebreaker when they come in the house, because it's just a social icebreaker. It's fun. It makes us laugh. And I wanted to say this because there was something you said about the assessment, because this happened recently in my classroom. We were doing some worksheets on clues about shapes. And I was just sitting over here like, oh my God, these kids are not doing this worksheet. They drowning. And it was saying, give them a clue to help them identify. So instead of doing it, I did this totally on the spot. And I just started putting, you know, shapes in a paper bag. And I said, you're going to work with a partner. You're going to play a game. You're going to take your hand. You're going to feel the shapes. And then you're going to describe them and guess it. It was totally off the cuff, but instead of me using that worksheet, I was able to assess students on their knowledge just through that. And they didn't know that I was doing it, but just seeing the difference from them trying to figure it out on the ditto and them guessing with their hand was just an authentic experience that I could measure.
Ann Cleary wants to say something. And when people are choosing to speak up, I have to take that, because I think in a Zoom space, we got to hear each other's voices. So we are going to truly end with Ann Cleary, and then we're going to turn it over to Sarah to finally celebrate our 4 wonderful presenters. Ann. Ann, are you there?
She's struggling with that mute button. Press it one more time. I saw you kind of unmute and mute. Or you can put it in the chat box if you can't unmute.
Definitely could. As she does that, we can all think about the thing that we're going to do to foster our creativity after we get off of Zoom. Okay, I think what we're going to do to respect time is, oh, we got it.
No, we do not have, there's no curriculum right now that includes play for children. Again, a lot of the things that I do just came from 18 years of teaching pre-K. So a lot of it is off the cuff, and a lot of it is from my own memory of play. That telephone game was something I remember having fun with when I was 5. I don't think play is accepted, again, because it can't be assessed. I know that every network has their expectations, and I think that's something I struggle with, because when you've been 18 years with that open space and creativity, and then you go to kindergarten, my first year, my kids were crying we want to go back, because I loop with my kids. So I had that relationship. They were crying and they were saying, we want to go back because we're not playing. We're doing all these workbooks. And so I started that adaptation, but this was the year that we had the teacher strike and COVID. So it was a weird year. So this is my first time coming back to kindergarten, because after that I went online to first grade. So with the blocks, it's just structured time of learning, 2.5 hours for reading, 2 hours for math, 30 minutes for social studies, 30 minutes for science. And so we have to follow those guidelines of the curriculum. I do feel that I have an administration that is supportive, because they do have like game day once a week, but I would like to see more of in the classroom, because some of those opportunities, I feel like I'm sneaking doing. And, you know, if the network comes out, I may not necessarily supposed to be doing them. So I would like for people to be open-minded. If I could just kind of get everybody to see that there are benefits and I can track and assess students, then maybe they'll be more open to me doing it, because right now I feel like I'm playing a game of hide and seek. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you to everyone for sharing your questions and your feedback. And if you had a question this evening that either didn't get answered, it got to me and it got lost before it got to a presenter, or you thought of it after the Q&A, that is a reason to please complete those feedback forms or go back and do them again if you need to add in some additional questions, because I'm sure that our 4 presenters would be interested in dialoguing with you further. This is the community that really matters for being able to collaborate. We heard it from Liz. We're hearing it when we're thinking about how can we go up and down the age spectrum. This is why this kind of community matters. On that note, I'm going to turn it back to Sarah. Thank you to all of the presenters for a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Kate, so much for what you've done for us tonight and will do for us on Monday. And congratulations to our 4 presenters. Again, as Kate said, please another round of applause, however that works for you. What a lovely, lovely night. So thank you so much. I have a sense, but I can only really imagine how much work and, you know, sort of sweat equity goes into this sort of project, and sort of how much you've thought through this and worked on your presentation and worked on your paper. And we're just so thrilled to be able to be even a little part of the culmination of that. So thank you very much. And then thanks to all of you for coming. I mean, the presentations are made so much, you know, richer by having an audience, and I think a really supportive, attentive audience as tonight's was, I think makes all the difference. So again, congratulations to our 4 fellow presenters. I will say, you know, for the 50th time, please, please, please try to complete a feedback form for every presenter you saw tonight. I just popped that link back in the chat, so it's right there where you need it. If you are able, we would love to have you join us for our second ARLI forum, which is on Monday night, same time, same place. The link is different, so you do need to register if you haven't done that already, but you'll get a Zoom link just as you did today. And we will have our 3 final fellows, and their research will be showcased. So it would be great to have another really robust audience like we had tonight. As Kate said, if you'd like to include questions or comments you have in the feedback forms themselves, that's great. I will go through all of them. Every presenter will receive all of the feedback that you've shared. If you would prefer to reach out to me directly with questions or comments in the meantime, certainly do that as well. And I think that's it for me. Deb, thank you for all your incredible work as the leader of this incredible group. And I hope you all have great weekends, and I hope to see you on Monday. So thanks so much again. Have a good one. Get some play in. Bye.